Hi everyone, I am back and trying to catch up with myself by putting together a short-ish lecture on angiosperm reproduction. I will tell you two things. First, I'm becoming overwhelmed by this whole situation and I'm doing the best I can. I hope that you are also doing the best that you can at this very moment. Secondly, angiosperm reproduction is what is actually what I study. It is my favorite topic kind of in the world to talk about. So I'm going to try to restrain myself a little bit and only give you the basics. I hope not to ramble too much. All right, I'm going to start with what the definition of an angiosperm is. An angiosperm in the plant kingdom is a flowering plant. That means a plant that produces a flowers and fruits. That is separate from plants such as gymnosperms, including the conifers and ginkgos. It's different from ferns, which do make spores, of course, but do not make pollen or fruits. Gymnosperms make pollen, but not, and they make seeds, but they don't make fruits or flowers. And then there's all sorts of other plants like liverworts and mosses and all sorts of non-vascular plants that don't even have xylem and phloem in the same way. So we've been focused on vascular plants, and now we're narrowing that even more to simply angiosperms. And we're going to focus on angiosperms because they're beautiful, as you can see, but also because they have really interesting interactions and ecology, and plus yours truly studies them. So here we go. Angiosperms are flowering plants. That's easy, except what's a flower? And you might kind of know what a flower is, but there's a technical definition that I'd like you to think about. A flower is essentially, at its core, a terminal bit of a shoot. And what that means is it's the last few modified leaves that a flowering structure reproduces. So flower parts are all modified leaves. And some of those leaves bear sporophylls. So what defines a flower is that it's a set of flower parts all stacked up on top of each other at the end of a shoot, and some of them bear sporophylls, which are sporangium bearing leaves. Okay, well, what's a sporangium? Okay, we didn't really go into this in too much detail, but a sporangium is a flower structure, it is a plant structure that contains spore-making cells that are able to undergo meiosis and produce haploid spores. And the haploid spores develop into structures that can produce gametes like eggs and sperm. Okay, so we're basically in an angiosperm. The flower has the parts in it that make eggs and sperm at the tips of some of their shoots. The defining structure of a flower is a pistil, which is it's a part of the plant that actually contains ovaries, and the ovaries inside the ovary are megasporangia that eventually contain structures that make ovules, and ovules have an egg. So a pistil is the part of the plant that contains ovules that eventually will contain the seeds after those ovules are fertilized. This means that there are actually multiple layers of maternal tissues surrounding developing embryos in flowering plants, and this sets flowering plants apart. They have fruit, and the fruit has multiple layers of structures and tissues that protect the developing embryo, not just a seed in a seed coat, but also a fruit wall, which develops from the pistil. All right, that was probably a lot, and I'll go over it again later. I just wanted to introduce you to the sort of more technical definitions of what a flower is. The next thing I want to do is talk about the basic flower structure. And I'm going to do this by talking about some terminology. And normally what I would do is draw this on the board and then have everybody dissect a flower, but I'm going to dissect the flower myself. But first I want to talk you through the terms, and then I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so flower parts, this sort of terminal shoot that contains multiple stacks of parts. The shoot actually has the parts arranged in whorls. And we talked about leaf arrangement before, where we have multiple nodes at the same point along the stem. So that's where it's helpful to know what a whorl is when you're studying flowers. It's less common among actual like photosynthetic leaves, but with the flower parts, they occur in whorls. There are layers of parts, and we're going to talk about them from the bottom up, from the outside in. All of the whorls tend to be joined right near one place where we call the receptacle, and we'll get to the receptacle because you can't really see it, at least on my tulip here. So here's the list of floral whorls. So these are all attached at the receptacle. You've got the calyx, the corolla, the androecium, and the pistil. So there's 4 of them, and each of them is made of component parts. So the calyx is made of sepals, the corolla is made of petals, the androecium is made of stamens, and the pistil has ovaries and then a stigma and a style. So we'll talk, and it contains the ovules. All right, so we're going to talk about each of these individually, but I want you to remember that most flowers in the angiosperms contain both male and female gametes. So they can produce pollen and seeds in most cases, not all cases, but most cases. So we call flowers that contain both male and female sex cells perfect flowers, or hermaphroditic flowers, or sometimes bisexual flowers. So they have lots of different names depending on the field of botany you're in. Okay, I'm going to pause here and I'm going to put up a blank screen. And then I'm actually going to try to like make myself bigger so that we can dissect the flower in a little bit larger format. Hi everyone. So I'm back and I hope I'm a little bit bigger. The idea with this flower dissection is that I'm going to pull apart the flower and show you the whorls and the component parts of each whorl from the outside in. So I'm coming at you with a lovely tulip, and this is sort of in honor of Dr. Percy Julian, who most of you have heard of. He was a huge fan of tulips, and it's his birthday this month, so happy birthday, Dr. Julian, and I'm going to pull apart your favorite flower in your honor. Okay, I'm going to start with so I just pulled the head of the tulip off. So you can tell it's the terminal shoot because there's no leaves coming out after the flower. So the flower is always the end, right? It's the terminal leaves that are produced are the leaves in the flower itself. All right, so I'm going to start with the outer whorl, which is called the calyx. Now in tulips, the calyx looks weird. The calyx looks like petals. They're not petals though. You can tell if you're folding down the first 3 parts of a tulip, they're a slightly different texture and they're attached at the same place. So these 3 here are actually sepals, and they form together collectively, they form the calyx. So on a rose or an apple flower, I have an apple flower around here somewhere. I don't know what I did with it. Ah, here it is. So in the apple flower, actually, you can sort of see the calyx is made of green sepals that when they're closed form the flower bud. Same for the tulip, like the outside of a tulip, which is sort of greenish and then turns colors, that's the sepals, collectively known as the calyx. So here's the green bit here is the calyx of this apple flower. All right, so I'm going to pull off the calyx of this tulip, and that leaves the next whorl of flower parts, which is the corolla. Corolla is the collective term for petals. And so you know what a petal is. Everybody knows what a flower petal is. So in this particular species, because it's a member of the Liliaceae, it's in the lily family, the flower parts come in multiples of 3. So there were 3 sepals, and there are 3 petals making up the corolla. So the word corolla means crown. So you think of the petals as usually the showiest part of of most flowers, not all flowers. All right, so I'm going to take the petals off. You can really see when you're looking at a tulip, you can see that the parts are modified leaves, right? You can sort of see the mid vein, and you can even see like what would have been the you can see what would have been almost the petiole of the leaf, right? As it's attached to the stem here. But I'm going to pull them off, and you can see the veins and everything. So you can definitely tell that they were leaves at one point in their evolutionary history. All right, so now we're getting to the good parts. So random story, this is my current sweetie of 22 years now, brought me flowers when we first started dating, and I immediately started dissecting them, which was not known at that time to be a gesture of affection and gratitude. So that did not go over well the first time. But after that, people started bringing me, or well, Jeanette started bringing me really sweet and complicated flowers, and it was really cute, and I loved it. All right, so here, what I have left, I don't know if you can see, is these little lollipop looking bits that have a filament that's a little bit small, like thin, but the lollipop looking bit at the top has yellow powdery pollen, and I'm trying to get it real up close so you can see it. And there are 6 of them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And each of those, and of course I don't have my forceps with me, that's fine. Each of those is a single stamen. So a stamen has a filament, which is just sort of parenchyma tissue and a little epidermis and probably a vein. It is really, it's not, its main function is to hold up the anther. And the anther is the male sporophyll. It's the microsporophyll, which has microsporangia in it that eventually make pollen, and the pollen eventually divides inside of it to make sperm. So pollen is actually a multicellular structure that inside it contains several cells, one of which will eventually be a sperm. Well, actually, there are 2 sperm. We'll get to that later, too. Anyway, so each of these anthers has thousands of very, very small little pollen grains, and you can sort of see they're yellow. I'm going to get some on my hand and see. So there's a bunch of pollen on my hand now. Hopefully I'm not allergic to tulip pollen. And there are 6 of those, and those are also in the whorl called the androecium. So the androecium, you might be able to tell from the name, is the male parts of the flower. And when I say male, what I mean is the parts that eventually produce sperm. I'm not talking about gender here, at least not in the human sense. If you want to talk about plant gender, I got a lot to say about it. We're not going to go into it right now. Okay, so we had the calyx, the corolla, and the androecium, which was collectively made of, in this case, 6 stamens. And the stamens had the anther containing the pollen and a filament. And then what we have left is the gynoecium, also known as, in this case, the pistil. The pistil has the style, which is usually a longer, like the racetrack where the pollen grows. It has the stigma, which is the receptive area that collects pollen that eventually grows down into the ovary. And then it has the ovary, which in this case is here. And if we could, I would cut it open and show you inside of that is the ovules. Yeah, I'm not going to go find my scalpel right now, but I would slit this open, and inside would be chambers where there would be little undeveloped seeds that were waiting for pollination in order to develop into the embryo inside the seed. All right, so that is a brief flower dissection, and I hope that you are able to find a flower yourself in your world and try to cut it open and look at all the parts. Really, the best way to learn about flower parts is to dissect them yourself. All right, I'm going to pause here. Hi, I'm back one more time. And at this point, what I would like to do is to review quickly with some more diagrams that of what I just basically told you. So again, a complete or perfect or bisexual or hermaphroditic flower has all 4 layers of parts, and they might vary in number depending on the species and sometimes depending on the individual. So starting from the outside in, you start with a receptacle where the whorls are all basically attached. So there's essentially no internodes. All the nodes are kind of stacked up on each other. You start with the sepals, and collectively the sepals form the calyx, and when the flower is immature and not quite open yet, the calyx actually is the outer covering of the flower. It's like what you think of as the bud of the flower. It's often green, but not always. Like in the case of the tulip, mine was purple. Inside the sepals, forming the calyx, you have the corolla. That's the layer of petals. So um, monocot flowers often will have 3 petals. Some will have 5 or 4 petals. It depends on the species. And usually those are showy. They're modified leaves. They don't have sex cells associated with them, but they're usually they usually function to attract pollinators in some way. Sometimes they have other functions too, but mainly they're attracting structures. Then you have the stamens. Collectively, the stamens are called the androecium. They are formed of the anthers at the top, which contain pollen eventually when they're mature, and then the filament, which attaches to the receptacle. And finally, the pistil. The pistil includes the ovary, and inside the ovary there are chambers that contain the ovules. So they don't have seeds until they are fertilized. Before they're fertilized, so scratch that out. That should say ovules and not seeds. The leading to the ovary is the style. So the style, I like to think of it as the pollen racetrack. It's the portion, it's the tissues of the pistil where the pollen is growing in a tube towards being called by the ovules. So they're following a hormonal signal by the maternal tissue. And then the stigma, which is at the tip of the style, and that tissue has really interesting cells that can adhere to pollen and allow the pollen to germinate and start growing down the style. So the stigma is easy to remember because often it's sticky, because it often has some kind of interesting sugar complex substances, like complex carbohydrates, that are both for adherence and for recognition of pollen that is the right species of pollen. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about, but I'm not going to go into it at all here. All right, and a little bit more about the androecium. I think I said this. The androecium is all the stamens in the flower. The anthers contain pollen, which the pollen contains the male sex cells, which we will call sperm in this case. And those male sex cells will fertilize the ovule. The pistil, again, is made of 1 or more carpels. So the carpel is the stigma, style, and ovary. Sometimes there's multiples of these, and sometimes there's only one. Don't worry about the word carpel in this class right now. Ovaries contain ovules, and ovules contain the female sex cells, also known as eggs. So obviously, if eggs are pollinated by sperm, you get the zygote, which will eventually develop into an embryo, and the ovule eventually will develop into what we call a seed. All right, I'm going to stop there. One more picture here. Oh, you'll get to those in a minute. Here's another picture of the parts in a different kind of way. These are very similar in arrangement to the ones I just talked about here. I didn't get to cut open the tulip ovary, but here's what you would see. You would see the tulip ovules stacked up together like little coins, actually. They're really cool. And here's another picture of different flower parts of a lily. And so you should review and be able to sort of easily talk about the different parts of a flower for this part of the lesson. And I'm going to pause here and then do another short video on pollination syndromes. All right, I hope you're enjoying this. I am always happy to talk about flowers. I miss you guys a lot, and I really miss taking you out to the woods this week because the wildflowers are abundant and beautiful at this time. Yeah. All right. So I hope you guys are having a good day, and I'll hopefully see some of you soon. Cheers.